Find the second derivative y double prime, or d squared y dx squared, for the function y equals sine squared of 2x, then evaluate y double prime of pi over 4. So y here is a trig function raised to a power of 2x. Before we take the derivative, let's rewrite this as the sine of 2x and then squared to remind us of how to take the derivative. To find the second derivative, we're going to first find the first derivative, y prime or dy dx. And we will start with the power rule. We'll bring the power down, so a 2, leave the inside alone, sine of 2x, subtract 1 from the power, and then multiply by the derivative of the inside. The derivative of sine is cosine, leave its inside alone, and now multiply by the derivative of its inside to complete the double chain rule. This 2 can move out front with this 2. Everything's multiplied here. So we have 4 sine 2x times cosine 2x. Our next derivative will therefore involve a product rule if we leave it in that form. We have a product of two functions, so our next derivative, y double prime or d squared y dx squared, will be 4 times the derivative of the first. Derivative of sine is cosine, leave its inside alone, multiply by the derivative of the inside to complete the chain rule, and then multiply by the second left alone, plus the first left alone, and the 4 just comes along. So sine of 2x, and then the derivative of the second, derivative of cosine, is negative sine, leave its inside alone, then multiply by the derivative of the inside to complete the chain rule. So our y double prime, or d squared y dx squared, will be, the first term we have a 4 and a 2 multiplying each other, so that will give us an 8. We have a cosine times a cosine, so cosine squared of 2x. For the next term we have a 4, a negative 1, and a 2 all multiplying each other. 2 times 4 is 8, and then times that negative will give us a negative 8. And then sine squared, sine times sine of 2x. So there is our second derivative. There is an identity for this if you factor the 8 out. Just something to be aware of. We have cosine squared minus sine squared. It's not plus, it's minus. If it was plus, it would be the Pythagorean trig identity and come out to a 1. But in the case of it being minus, it's actually the double angle formula for cosine. And this can be rewritten as cosine of twice the angle of 2x, cosine of 4x. So there's an optional way to write that second derivative, y double prime or d squared y dx squared. Now the next thing we want to do is evaluate y double prime at pi over 4. And you can use either version of y double prime. I will just use the first one in case you don't notice the identity. So the first one being this one here, evaluated at pi over 4. We have 8 times, now remember that cosine squared means to work out the cosine, so 2 times the pi over 4, so this is 2x, and then square the result. And then minus 8 sine of 2 times the pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, and then square the result. Before we work each of these out, let's reduce the 2 pi over 4 to a pi over 2 in each of them. It will then look a little more familiar to the unit circle. And the cosine of pi over 2 is a 0, so we have 8 times 0 squared. And the sine of pi over 2 is a 1, so we'll have a 1 squared. That will give us 8 times 0 squared, which is a 0, minus 8 times 1 squared, which is a 1. 8 times 0 is 0, minus 8 times 1 is 8. And 0 minus 8 comes out to negative 8.